Hey everyone, this episode is brought to you by River, the place that I personally go to securely invest in Bitcoin with confidence and with zero fees.
This is a catalyst unlike anything we have ever seen that's going to push our energy generation to its absolute limits. Like, we never had a customer power that we can just accompany anywhere with anything. And like, not everywhere is blessed with hydro. So nuclear power is pretty much the next best thing if you're trying to reduce your coal and natural gas.
I have a funny story. So I was in Calgary and I was at the Stampede and there was a Bitcoin conference happening there. Ben Perrin was putting on, and I'm in the hallway and I'm chatting with some people. And I forget which show. I think it was maybe the one with Prince Philip that recently came out. And somebody saw in the comments of the Twitter conversation that you and I were exchanging messages about nuclear. And I don't know who the person was, but they said to me, "Oh my God, you got to get this guy on your show. He knows so much about nuclear. He'd be such an amazing guest." And like, my concern when people kind of reach out as maybe potential guests on the show is, how do they interview this and that? And the person's like, "He's amazing. You want to have him." So kudos to you for whoever the random person that I was talking to there. Sorry if I don't remember your name in Calgary, but
No,
yeah.
I know exactly who that was. That was Cameron. He's
Okay. All right.
he's very excitable, and yeah, we met through just randomly Bitcoin, just randomly talking on Twitter, and then found out that we actually kind of both live in Ontario, and our employers kind of have a work relationship together. So it was interesting. Okay. So yeah, we met kind of in a roundabout way through Bitcoin, and how have
Amazing.
An interesting relationship. Yeah, Bitcoin brings people together in crazy ways.
Well, Cameron, I apologize for not remembering your name, sir. Okay. So where I want to start is just with the big picture, because myself included, I am no expert on nuclear energy and just how this, anybody that I talk to that deeply understands energy, they're just, all of them are saying this is the direction that everything has to go because of the demands that are going to be coming from AI to whatnot. But for the audience, give them a little bit of an overview on the history of nuclear, and then kind of maybe the broad brush point of view of like why this is such an important topic right now.
Yeah, nuclear power is definitely getting a lot of attention when it comes to grid reliability and energy sovereignty. Yeah, that's been made very clear in recent years with recent geopolitical events. So yeah, all eyes are on nuclear, and a lot of people want to know a lot about it. I myself am personally not an expert myself. I just listen to a lot of podcasts, and I have access to experts that can fill me in on a lot of this information. So I've gone down these rabbit holes quite significantly, just like many of us Bitcoiners have gone down the whole money rabbit hole. So it's another vast and deep industry to explore that been dealing with a lot of FUD in its own way, much longer than Bitcoin has even been around. And it's been an interesting development coming into these last 2 years. But to go back to the beginning, it was just Einstein theorized that the E equals MC square equation. And then 40 years later, they discovered that you could harness the energy that's released when an atom fissions. And we started to harness that capability to generate energy for obviously weapons and then peaceful nuclear power shortly afterwards. But to release that energy, it just requires an unstable elements like uranium put into a condition where when it's bombarded with neutrons, it becomes even more unstable and it breaks apart, releases lots of energy, creates a chain reaction, which releases more neutrons that then interact with more uranium. And then that reaction is sustained at a 1-to-1 ratio by using various means like to absorb those neutrons so that they can keep it under control. And then it's just a very fancy way of heating water that is then transferred to steam that turns a turbine and generates electricity. So in the early 50s, the industry learned that they could scale this technology up very quickly. They learned how to do it safely. And then in Canada as well, we also learned how to do it without having to enrich the uranium. So we can uniquely use the CANDU reactors to process uranium that is in its natural form, so it doesn't doesn't have to go through any further processes, which in recent times that has become a complication because fuel supplies have been kind of disrupted by geopolitical events in Russia, as the rest of the Western world is now looking to fill in that gap by aggressively reinvigorating their fuel lines. So it's yeah, and then sometime around the 70s is when it slowed down, and then into the 90s there was less and less nuclear reactors being built, and then I think the last two that were built in America were the ones that were just finished in Vogel. Canada had built their last reactors in the 90s. There were plans to build more in the 2000s, but those never came through. And most of the world has just seen nuclear power kind of steadily holding on to its role and providing power where it exists, but then slowly tapering off as more competition has been entering these markets. And there's a lot of reasons why it's been happening so quickly. And we can get into more of the complex economics of how like subsidies affect it, and just the general fiat incentives, and the fact that the 70s was a significant period in time that Bitcoiners are very familiar with. So when you start seeing trends like construction permits for nuclear reactors just almost ceasing entirely in the 70s, Bitcoiners will obviously point to WTF happened in 1971. So yeah, it's been I'm still learning a lot of this for myself and how to articulate it as best as I can. But yeah, in general, nuclear power's had its ups and downs, and had a good bull market in the 60s, bear market through the 70s, a little bit of a bull during the 80s and 90s, and then kind of tapered off for the last 20 years or so. But now it looks like we are going to need so much power to fuel this high-tech society that we're building that we really aren't left with a choice. And especially if there's significant demand to reduce hydrocarbons from power and heat generation, nuclear power is really the only technology that can fill that role. So there is a reinvigorated efforts to renew like human capital, supply chain capital, and just all of the resources needed to push some new advanced reactors over the commercial development line and get this next phase of nuclear power really off to the races.
This is my challenge. So whenever I talk with people about nuclear, if you lined up 10 people, 7 of these 10 at least are just going to say, yeah, but Ryan, it's dangerous. How do you respond to this? Because this marketing campaign or whatever it is that has like generated this mind virus that nuclear equals dangerous is it's quite the hurdle to overcome politically in any region that's trying to bring more of this into their region as the power source. So like how do you deal with that whenever you talk with family members or friends or whoever, and that's kind of their response?
Well, you can always try to break it right down for numbers, but like that's always kind of cold and unemotional. But when you break it down per kilowatt, like nuclear power is by far the safest form of technology, of energy generation that we have. Despite the sensational events that have happened, like you would be hard pressed to put like about 100 casualties involved directly in those accidents. So it's relative to other industries, it's not as dangerous as the media narrative would lead us to believe. So, because there's many other different ways to have industrial accidents. There was that fertilizer explosion that happened in the Beirut port a few years ago.
Yeah.
There was actually a battery factory that had an explosion in South Korea just a few weeks ago where 20 to 30 people had died in. So it's like just industrial accidents happen in all industries, and actually like working in the nuclear industry, the injuries and anything related to like safety issues is more comes from working with electricity, working with hot steam, and working with large moving parts. Like those are where most of the industrial accidents happen in nuclear, just like in any other industry that is dealing with these large industrial processes. So there's that. And then like radiation itself is it's a poorly understand phenomenon that once you learn how to handle it and protect yourself from it, it is actually just a reasonably manageable industrial hazard that we can overcome and manage. And when it does get into the environment, we do have the capabilities of cleaning it and remediating it. We've proven it a number of times. It does cost a significant amount of money when accidents like that do happen, and it doesn't clean up, and it does potentially affect the operability of certain reactors if there are incidents that need to be overcome and retrofitted to prevent it from happening again in the future. But we learn from these mistakes, just like any other industry, like aircraft. We don't stop flying airplanes just because there's been a few aircraft that go down. We learn from it. We put those new lessons into practice, and then we iterate on what we learned, and we move forward, and we make it better and safer. So and like nuclear power, especially in this industry, like they stress safety like so much that sometimes it does impede actually like making progress on getting work done. So it is a catch-22. Like we want to be safe and want to prove that we're safe, and sometimes going out of the way so much to be safe, it does it does have other effects that come down to like costs and the ability to move forward efficiently and effectively. But when it comes down to it, it's just such an awesome technology once it's operating and affordable.
I've heard that in the past like 20 years, the safety on nuclear has gone almost parabolic compared to where it was, call it in the 70s. Is this something that is a true rumor, or kind of some of your thoughts on the progression of the safety over the most recent times?
Well, the newest reactors are going to be designed to be almost passively safe, so that they would fail into a safe state, unlike what happened at Fukushima, where they lost cooling and then they weren't able to shut the reactor down safely. The generation 4 are all going to be basically part of their design basis, and their regulatory requirement is that they're going to be able to shut down themselves if they lost power, they lost coolant, they lost for any other reason. They would be able to, the physics of the reaction start to cool itself, because they're using fuels that as they heat themselves up, it starts to reduce the aggressiveness of the reaction, and so it actually starts to bring itself down. So they're starting to use a lot more technologies and then coolants that'll be easier to pull away from the reactor core, so that it can actually let itself into a passive state, and then they can just be left in that state indefinitely until they need to be restarted. Then we can get back for whatever maintenance operations that need to be done, if that's what the case is. But they're definitely taking this next generation of reactors to a point where we won't have to have as the same really aggressive safety standards that we've applied to the previous generation of reactors, because I don't think we're going to need to apply the aircraft collision standard to modern reactors that they have had applied to the previous generation. So there's a lot of argument that some of these regulations that were felt appropriate for the existing fleet are definitely need to be revised and modernized and updated for the new technology that's available and slowly coming into the market and maturing and going through their licensing and regulatory processes to get to that first of a kind, which is kind of a race right now, because first movers will have a huge advantage in these markets.
So let's talk about the intersection of nuclear and Bitcoin. You're of the opinion that the fiat system basically distorts the incentives of how power grids and all the infrastructure is being built out. Explain some of this opinion of yours.
Well, the way that I see it, and I've had others that are definitely smarter than me explain it to me, and reading Meredith Angwin's book is very good on this topic, called Shorting the Grid. She goes into great detail that what happens when you have competing sources of generation on a grid. If you say you've got your baseload generator, your coal plant, your nuclear power plant, and then you have other sources of generation that's now coming online at an accelerated pace for windmills and solar panels, a lot of them collect revenue outside of just selling power into the market. So they have renewable energy credits, production tax credits, all kinds of different revenue streams that are outside of that market. So when they bid into the market for what they can earn, what they need to be profitable, it depresses the prices in that market for the other generators that are on that market. So they can bid and still be profitable at less than zero negative prices on these markets. Whereas then that exposes your nuclear power generator to those negative prices at the same time, because everybody basically collects the same price when the demand is low. If you're pushing electrons onto the grids, you have to, you're going to get whatever the real time price is, unless you have like large PPAs and other day ahead agreements and whatnot. There's all kinds of different contract arrangements that can be made on these grids, but it makes it difficult for your baseload generators to then project their revenue margins, because they're not being exposed to accurate price signals on these markets that would exist if they were actually in a free market that's what they're only competing in just selling electricity. They're not playing all these other arbitrage games and subsidy harvesting where they can actually, like, that is their revenue model, is to collect those subsidies instead of playing in the market. And they actually have such a perverse incentives that, because of the stipulations in, they have to be pushing electrons onto the grid in order to collect some of these subsidies. They're pushing electrons onto the grid even when the grid doesn't want them. So then that causes a lot more even disruption. So that's where a lot of people that really push aggressively for more investment and more subsidies for wind and solar to get them more on the grid, because they build them fast and cheap, and it looks good because it's free electricity. They don't really take into full account these second and third order effects that start having more wider impacts on the grid, because you also have to consider that they start taking up a lot more land, and they start taking up like lower quality land, and you have to deliver like more transmission infrastructure to actually get to them. So then they start causing jams and interconnection queues. And then also, when they're all pushing electrons on the grid at the same time, the grid can only take so much of that. So then it causes congestion, and then some of these generators have to curtail. And then it causes many, many distortions in these grids when they are pushed on at a far greater rate than what the market would naturally allow for. Like, I'm not saying in any way that there's no place for wind and solar in these grids, but the way that they're being pushed at such an aggressive rate, like it does give the vibe that something's being set up for a very big rug pull, because the chart is just exponential at the rate that they're being installed. That's not sustainable, especially if they hold the interest rates higher, because most of that growth came in that environment when they were exposed basically to surf. So so like, it was a huge impact on how rapidly these were pushed on grids. And now that they are exposed to more realistic interest rates, a lot of these projects are not being able to prove that they can be economically viable without higher guarantees from the utilities that they are trying to develop contracts with. So it's interesting to see then that this new reality that, like, it seems like Bitcoiners are always ahead of the curve on when it comes to these financial aspects, that the proponents of wind and solar, they haven't really caught up to this reality yet. And it feels like they're in for a rude awakening as these things start to taper off.
When we're not even talking about the capex of these of all of this infrastructure, because a lot of it's been installed in the last 10 years. And so a lot of this capex expense is going to really start to manifest itself in what I would say the coming decade. And at these higher rates, these higher fiat rates, I don't know. I think that maybe there's some of that hasn't really even fully percolated up into the market as to the effects of some of these decisions, some of these policy decisions that are incentivizing all of this type of stuff.
Are you familiar with the strong towns, where he explains like the urban sprawl, how it kind of goes in layers, and they build new layers onto these cities in order to finance maintenance of the existing parts of the city? And and then after like 3 generations, it essentially collapses on itself, because it's just layers of debt that keep having to be refinanced to finance growth in order to finance the maintenance of what already exists. And then eventually it all falls in on each other. And he described that's how like what happened to Detroit and a lot of other American cities.
Is this an article or a book?
It's called Strong Parallels. Somewhere in my bookshelf, but it was Ben Sessions actually recommended it to me when I did Why Are We Bullish way long ago. But it was an interesting idea when I was reading through how he was describing it. It kind of described, like, it doesn't map on perfectly, but it did have interesting similarities to how they would, the way that they harvest the subsidies in some of these wind farms is what they'll do is once the subsidies expire, because they only last for 10 years, and the expectation is that the life of the windmill is about 20, 25 years. But if there's no tax credits to sustain them and they start getting exposed to real market prices, then they're not as competitive on these markets, and then often they will just not operate anymore. So there's been instances where they will completely like bulldoze and rebuild just so they can restart subsidy clock again. And then I've also read other stories where that is when they'll transfer ownership to a local owner who is now responsible for the end of life and the maintenance and the decommissioning of these things. So then it's no longer out of their hands. They basically they pump their bags and then they find a new bag holder, or they find a new way to pump their bags again. So it bears an interesting resemblance to what I've learned a lot about the Bitcoin markets and Bitcoin promoting, but it seems because it's in the real world, it's a little bit more slower acting. And I hope that it doesn't collapse anything too severe, but I do think that their expectations are in for a significant rug pull at the exponential rate that they have been growing, sustaining or at any time into the future.
Talk to us about, in when you're building something that's so capital intensive to start off, like a nuclear power plant, you almost run into this chicken and egg problem where the nuclear power plant is going to be supplying so much more demand than maybe that local area can really handle. There's ways to basically sell that back into the grid, but some of that comes down to like how far you're pushing the electrons that make it worthwhile to make such a large capital investment of building this power plant. What I find so fascinating about Bitcoin is it really kind of alleviates if you can get some type of private partnership with maybe a mining facility to step in. You have a buyer of last resort set up right there on the spot that can soak up a lot of that demand. That they don't have to transmit it far at all. They'll literally, soak it all up right there on site. Talk to us about this idea. Is it even more so with nuclear because of maybe the upfront installation cost is that much more than other power plants? That's not something I'm well versed on. I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on this, moving forward in the coming 10 years as far as these relationships with Bitcoin miners with respect to nuclear.
Yeah, they're definitely large capital intensive projects, and a lot of that gets front loaded. Even like part of the decommissioning costs have to be incorporated into the initial planning of these projects. And there's a lot of front end engineering, all the licensing, site preparation. There is significantly more that goes into that than just siting a natural gas plant. So there definitely needs to be a vision for how they're going to get a return on this investment. Because if there isn't, they're not even going to consider the project in the first place. Like when the Vogel was first proposed, apparently there was like 26 reactors being proposed at the time, but only those two ever got off the finish line. And then with the other two that they started got stopped halfway. One's in summer in South Carolina, but they definitely need to have certainty that they're going to have that demand. So my interest has been in the small modular reactors. That's where I started to really take an interest in where Bitcoin mining can apply to this, because the company that I work for, Canadian Nuclear Labs, also disclaimer that these opinions are my own. My employer doesn't have an opinion on Bitcoin mining, at least not yet. I'm working on that. We're going to be hosting the first of a kind pilot project of a 5 megawatts electrical reactor, termed micro modular reactors. So it's the smallest category of the small modular reactors that they want to apply to different categories. The larger ones, they're towards the 300 megawatt range. They want to use those to displace mostly coal generation and oil generation on grid in various industries that they can be applied to. And then the smaller ones where we can start thinking about deploying nuclear power to off-grid scenarios. But like you said, if you're deploying a significant amount of power capacity and you do not have sufficient demand to consume all of that, you're going to have a lot of trouble convincing investors that this is a worthwhile project to invest in. So one study that my company actually did, they have a scenario where they compared the baseline diesel generation with diesel, wind, and diesel, all just nuclear, and then a mix of like diesel, wind, and nuclear and batteries. They tried a bunch of different scenarios like that. But the one point that they made when showing the nuclear scenario was that because they have to build enough to support peak demand, even though overall that peak demand is only reached for a short period of time during the year, they're going to leave a significant amount of that capacity underused, which significantly compromises the economics case for building these in the first place. So my proposal, that actually the idea came from my wife, just a random conversation. I taught her about Bitcoin mining after I got really excited about it. And then she's reading about Elon Musk and pointed out that if his complaint is hydrocarbons fueling Bitcoin mining, then we should use nuclear power. And she had no idea how profound of an idea that is. Now I completely captured my attention and put me into this space where I'm now the nuclear Bitcoiner guy, finding myself talking with guys like Preston, Pysh, and Safety and a Moose. It's been a pretty wild ride. And yeah, so it just spawned out of this idea, just like we're going to be building these small reactors where we have the technology to amplify them in a way that was inconceivable before Bitcoin mining existed, because there is no load like this. Like, there's a lot of exploration into companion loads, like doing hydrogen electrolysis, doing desalination, doing like synthetic fuel production, producing ammonia. There's all kinds of different things that you can do with the power available to just have it fill in that extra margin of space between your average consumption and your peak consumption that can curtail its load. But where Bitcoin mining beats them all is that it's dematerialized. It doesn't have any physical constraints on it. You don't need to store any feedstock. You don't need to store and transport any final products. Like, you have a Bitcoin mine in northern Canada that you get that your proceeds sent directly to from your Brains wallet to your Lightning wallet, and you can spend it at the bar in El Salvador within a few minutes. Like, that is remarkably revolutionary in how we can arbitrage the value of power that's trapped and stranded in the middle of nowhere. But because now that we have this, we can start to conceive of much bolder strategies than building just enough power to sustain what we're going to need in the near term or in the present. We can start thinking about projections of like what sort of demand we expect in the future. And then we can build that in the present. And then the Bitcoin miners are the perfect placeholder. And then as more sophisticated energy buyers enter the market, the Bitcoin miners will inevitably be bid out because they're the bottom feeders that just take whatever's scraps are left and available for them. And they'll go find somewhere else to build a new energy oasis that eventually some other buyer will come in and bid them out, and they'll repeat this process. And basically what I just described is Brandon Quigham's pioneer species thesis. We can already kind of start seeing it play out in a way with what happened at the Susquehanna power plant, where TeraWulf had started the project where they built 50 megawatts of Bitcoin mining behind the meter at a nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania. And then concurrently with the owner of that utility, they started building nearly a gigawatt data center campus that was recently acquired by Amazon Web Services. So they had an interesting foresight to know that there's demand coming for this power. But now the whole nuclear industry is keeping an eye out for us. They can see that there is going to be a massive rush on their power plants for this power. But one of the problems that now seems to be arising is if you start pulling gigawatts off of the grid, they're no longer contributing to delivery costs, which those fees contribute to the ongoing maintenance and operation of the transmission infrastructure. So if you're pulling power behind the meter, they're no longer contributing to those funds, which means that in order to fulfill the mandates for the revenue that is needed to maintain the transmission infrastructure, gets spread across a smaller amount of customers, which ultimately means that they're going to be paying more to maintain it. So there's utilities are starting to be concerned about this massive rush of power coming for their large generators. But then, as we mentioned earlier, like nuclear power plants have been getting a raw deal lately because of the market dynamics that they've been dealing with. So they are welcoming this guaranteed power load that they're going to get from these large data centers. But then on the other hand, second order effects, like it has reverberating effects on the grid that aren't immediately apparent when you're just trying to look out for your own selfish interests as a power generator. So it's a very complex system that is, when you see like one major component shift and then other gears start shifting, and then yeah, it's interesting to learn about, because I'm still new in this stuff, but it's a
It's
deep
very
rabbit hole.
reflexive. It's very reflexive what you're describing, as far as you move this variable, then this one over here moves, and then you have to address that. And it's very reciprocal in nature, I guess, is what you're getting at there. So when I'm looking at this and I'm saying long term, if I was going to be advising some, smaller nation state, maybe that doesn't have a lot of power infrastructure, and they're looking at where we're going to be in 10, 15, 20 years from now. Obviously, they want to be a major player in AI. They want to be a major player in Bitcoin. The two innovations that I think are probably going to be the most paramount innovations for the coming decade. If you're going to advise one of these countries, and let's say they really want to be the world leader in AI, they have to have massive power infrastructure to run these data centers that are crunching out these models. Well, the only way you're going to do that is if you have all the power and infrastructure there. So how do you get back to the chicken and egg thing that we were talking about earlier? You almost have to have this relationship with Bitcoin miners initially to get all of this enormous amounts of power and infrastructure in place. And then once you have it, then it's like, hey, Google or whatever company that is trying to be the market leader in AI, you can attract them down there because you have all this excess power that can then compete with the hash rate that's being pointed at Bitcoin right out of the gate. I think that any country that takes this on, that truly understands like where this is all going, especially on the AI front, and what's going to be required to be a market leader in AI. They have to understand Bitcoin, and they have to understand nuclear first before they are even able to think about competing in that space. I'm curious if you agree with this, and if you do or don't, I'm curious to hear the nuance, or maybe the different side of this opinion that I have, and how viable you think some of this is.
Well, it definitely plays into the game theory of, like, if you want to control your own fate, you're going to have your own affairs in order, and making sure that you've got your power game in line. That's going to be important, especially if you want to be participating in this high tech future. Like, AI is going on astounding demands for power coming up in the near future. And I don't think anybody was ready for what we're seeing now. And I don't know, maybe it is just a bubble that's going to taper off and normalize, or maybe this just keeps going and grows exponentially. But it's an incredibly invaluable tool in so many different ways. Like, I only tinker with it a little bit, like the image generation and the chatbot and a little bit of like coding stuff. But some of the stuff that I heard about being applied with it is going to change how we interact in immense ways. And then you interlay like Bitcoin into that, includes like the financial rails, and then I've got the software war book behind me. I've read Jason Lowery's thesis that inevitably, when as nation states start to clue into this game, like, they're going to want to mine all the Bitcoin within their jurisdiction. We heard that from the Orange Man just the other day. I love the guy's enthusiasm, and that's not quite how it works, but we'll see about that, because it's going to be an incredibly aggressive competition as more and more players start to actually understand the gravity of this game that we are playing. This is a catalyst unlike anything we have ever seen. That's going to push our energy generation to its absolute limits. Like, we have never had a customer of power that we can just accompany anywhere with anything, and like, not everywhere is blessed with hydro. So nuclear power is pretty much the next best thing if you're trying to reduce your coal and natural gas. And I'm not a detractor against coal and gas, because they're great, reliable source of power, and it's better than what comes before it, burning wood and burning biomass and whatnot. So I'm all for I put reliability is at the top of my list. Like if you want to put green, if you want to prioritize green, number 2, 3, like above affordable, sure, whatever. But reliability always has to be number 1, especially seeing what's happening in countries where reliability is starting to wane. And we're seeing instances where once very high productive civilizations that are now struggling to keep the lights on at sometimes during the day. It starts voluntarily, and then it becomes involuntary, and then it's scheduled to be only 2 hours, then it becomes 6 hours. It starts becoming very difficult to plan an economy on those things, especially when you have a lot of infrastructure that was built with the assumption that you're always going to have readily available power. You start having to consider how you're going to keep freezers on long term and other like refrigeration, actually just run a business in general. Like it becomes incredibly challenging. And then you definitely, in those circumstances, whoever's investing in generators is going to do very well for themselves. And that causes other problems, because then they can become their own like little mafias themselves that run their little fiefdoms, because everybody becomes dependent upon these people that had the foresight to actually build out this power for what little power infrastructure they can have. Well, the main grids are just total basket cases. And so reliability should always be at the top of everyone's list when they're considering these things. And getting into Bitcoin is going to make sure that they are able to have a reliable way to develop their infrastructure without having that uncertainty that it's not going to be viable. Because when you can't turn your power plants, power plants can't make a profit, they won't operate. And it's really as simple as that. If you can't pay for the resources, you're not going to have them. So it's very important that we've really applied the best strategy that we have available to us to make sure that we can get power to wherever we want it. Because there's a lot of places that don't have anything now, and that's why they're really looking at nuclear power as an option. Because this next generation of smaller reactors, it lowers the bar for achieving nuclear power, because it doesn't require quite the same capital investment. So that's why there's a lot of hope that as the countries that are already experienced with nuclear power develop this new technology, then it will be able to proliferate a lot easier and more safely to international markets, because of the way that it is designed. So it'll be a lot more comfortable for the international regulators when this next generation of nuclear power plants is available to the market.
One of the most common questions I get asked from family and friends is, Preston, where do you personally buy your Bitcoin from? And the answer is really simple. I buy it on river.com. Not only can you easily buy Bitcoin with 0 fees on recurring orders, you can have peace of mind knowing Bitcoin on River is held 1-to-1 in multi-sig cold storage, all while being fully licensed and regulated in the United States. Plus, their relationship managers are US-based and available by phone for you or your business. Additionally, River has built their own infrastructure from the ground up, which means they don't rely on third parties to function like other Bitcoin exchanges. River also just created a new feature not found anywhere else called River Link. It allows you to send Bitcoin over a text message to easily orange pill your family, pay a friend for dinner, or send a gift. There's a new standard for investing in Bitcoin, and River is setting it. Go to river.com/fundamentals and get up to $100 free when you sign up and buy Bitcoin. That's river.com/fundamentals. In a world where convenience often compromises security, many investors settle for solutions that do not fully meet the demands of Bitcoin security. That's where the Bitcoin Way comes in. Offering a personalized white glove service, they will guide you through every step of the way to achieve full self-custody, ensuring you adhere to the strictest self-custody standards. Their experienced team helps establish robust security practices that cover all aspects of self-custody, cybersecurity, and privacy. Their ultimate goal? To empower you to become fully sovereign. Beyond securing your Bitcoin, they also offer services such as inheritance planning,
Plan B strategies, assisting in relocating to Bitcoin-friendly locations to further enhance your sovereignty, and much, much more. Take the first step to true financial independence. Visit thebitcoinway.com/TIP to schedule your free consultation call. Don't delay in securing your generational wealth the right way. Opt in for security over convenience and protect your future. Your family line will thank you.
The irony for me is if you're a miner, one of the huge risks that you run is where you set up shop, where you build out all this infrastructure, and whether politically you're going to be kicked out or they're going to have unfriendly laws and policies and regulations, 2 years after you spend all that money building out the infrastructure. So there's an incentive for policymakers to find somebody that becomes the buyer of last resort for all this energy if they build a new power plant. So they want some type of long-term contract. I'm going to use the word contract. It's not the right word, but they want some type of a long-term public-private partnership. And the miners also want that. And so it's like this match made in heaven for a country to build out all their infrastructure and have a buyer there ready to soak it up. And it's just, we really haven't seen it happen in a demonstrative kind of way. Why do you think that that's the case? And more importantly, what can we do to start informing and educating policymakers and miners alike to really kind of work harder at accomplishing this? And maybe it could be just my ignorance that I don't see this happening. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are around that.
Well, like a lot of them don't understand the problem because it is a very complex system. Like if you don't understand electricity and you don't, if the first time you really start thinking about the electrical grid is when you start having stress in the grid and blackouts, then yeah, most people don't start asking questions until it gets to that. But when it comes to attracting the Bitcoin miners to perform this role, like it's still a maturing technology. Like I've only been paying attention to the space since early 21. And it's matured significantly even since then. And from what I'm hearing about is coming on the horizon, like the type of ASICs that are going to be able to power scale dynamically and sync with any grid signal. They'll be able to just drop containers at a power generating plant and just walk away and not even think about it. It's going to be so much easier and accommodating for power plants when they are able to be a lot more like hands off. And then incorporating other ways that will make them feel a little bit more comfortable and trying to give them assurances that they're not going to have to deal with the volatility that comes with Bitcoin mining. Is like products like the hash price forwards that Luxor's has. That's going to be a huge value to getting them a little bit more comfortable with these markets because it's a product that they're familiar with from other markets. And power trading is they're familiar with hedging and all of these other strategies to reduce their volatility and uncertainty in these turbulent times they find themselves in. But it's I think as this next cycle is going to play itself out, we're going to see a lot more maturity from the Bitcoin mining market, especially like seeing how many of these companies like the public miners, they seem to have managed that last bear market incredibly well compared to how I heard that many Bitcoin miners went through the previous bear market. So it's going to give the utilities and generators a lot more confidence seeing how well they are at managing capital, managing risk, and managing all of the other uncertainties that come with the turbulence of dealing with power markets and also dealing with the Bitcoin market, financial markets, and all craziness that comes with that. And that's going to slowly start to bring them together. Like I like what I'm working on is hoping to kind of bear fruit within like the 5 to 10 year time frame as the small modular reactors start maturing. So I'm in kind of relationship building mode where I'm building a network of Bitcoin miners and getting to know as many of them as I can, so that when I start having these conversations with people in the nuclear industry, I can introduce them to the right people that I am seeing doing exactly what we need, providing the services, providing like flexibility as a service and curtailment on these grids, and being a good anchor load no matter where they find themselves, whether it's in the middle of a jungle in Malawi or behind the meter in Pennsylvania or giant gigawatt site in Texas. They've been showing quite an adept set of unique skills that generators and utilities are definitely going to start paying attention to, because they absolutely need to embrace like the flexibility that is offered by the Bitcoin miners, as there's a lot more intermittency on the grids and a lot more uncertainty with power prices and the fluctuations in the power markets that we're dealing with, because you never know what's going to happen in the near future. Because from what I understand, the strategic petroleum reserve is getting really low, so that's going to need to be refilled sooner or later. And there's also and it just seems like such short time thinking just to get like
Very fiat,
political points. Yeah,
very fiat based thinking. Yes.
yeah.
Hey, so you have an opinion on kind of envisioning microgrids using sediments with their power plants acting as a central financial and power hubs. This is a really interesting concept. I don't think everybody that's listening to this might be familiar with sediments. So if you could kind of give just a real generic overview of that and kind of how it fits into this vision of financial hubs and power hubs.
Yeah. So from listening to the various podcasters, and Obi talked about how Prediments works, it seems like a community bank type of structure where there'll be a few local individuals that are part of that community will essentially be key holders or guardians for a larger mint, where it would just be a pool of funds that are pegged 1-to-1 with Bitcoin that a community can use. So one of these things that I've kind of been thinking about is, as these industries kind of mature into each other, we're starting to see Bitcoin mining merging with power, and we're also seeing like financial rails all layered on top of that. Because as far as I can tell, it's again not a clean analogy, but there's a lot of striking similarities between the way that the architecture of the power grid and the architecture of the lightning infrastructure. It's just nodes and channels, really. If you think about it, a generator is a node, transmission lines, a channel, and then substations. So the electrons flow, and then now we're also starting to see technologies and services like Synoda that are allowing sats to flow from a consumer to a power generator in real time as they're consuming electricity. So we could probably also start seeing that with the other utilities. And then a friend of mine's working on a project where he's taking that in the reverse direction and using LN bits as a way to curtail power. He's tested it out with just, if his idea was, if you can turn things on, like light bulbs or gumball machines, or electrocute Peter McCormick on stage, because Denmark was doing a panel with them, and he was testing out some of the new capabilities that he'd been trying with LN bits. But anyways, my friend Juan Carlo, he figured that if you can turn things on with it, you can also turn things off there. So he's been tampering around with being able to send lightning transactions that can then like turn down a thermostat or turn off a light. So he has this bold idea that he wants to create a software suite where utilities can then use that to kind of create a bounty to incentivize consumers to curtail their energy use for energy conservation programs. So he's working on something like that right now. So I'm kind of his fanboy, just pitching it as wherever it sounds in, wherever it makes sense. And because that's just one of these tools. Now you've got Synoda, and then you also have now you've got a two-way lightning channel between the utility and the customer, so they can actually flow sats between them in that way. And it starts forming this web where power plants, if they start accumulating Bitcoin, they're going to be central financial hubs in their communities, because the sats are going to flow through them. They're earning it through mining. They're going to be earning it if they're collecting revenue in Bitcoin through Synoda. And it's also just going to be inevitable that Bitcoin's just going to be a natural units that they start accounting for their treasury in as well. So, because the sooner or later, the Michael Saylor's strategy is going to find its way into a lot more than just a few small companies. And it's going to be interesting when large utilities start seeing the value of having a reserve asset that can't be printed, because they can literally create it with the product that they create, whereas the rest of us only can acquire it by purchasing it or trading it for a good and service. So they are in a very unique position as we start to transferring more towards this Bitcoinized future that we are all looking forward to.
What are some of the current challenges that you see moving forward for nuclear that some maybe aren't thinking about, or that you think are probably the most important to address in the coming 5 to 10 years?
Human capital. More than anything, we need talented individuals of all kinds, whether like not just nuclear engineers and nuclear physicists, like thermal hydraulics, structural engineering, mechanical engineering. Every trade that you can think of is involved in the building and maintaining of nuclear power plants. So we need to have very aggressive engagement with the next generation and present this technology as where it's worth pursuing. So, and there's been positive sentiments. I've been hearing people that are in these courses, like nuclear physics courses, that their courses numbers have doubled in recent years, which is a good sign, but we still are going to need a lot more, because where there's thousands going into like computer technology and finance, there's a few dozen going into nuclear technology. So it's kind of disproportionate as to how many people are coming our way, but they're attracted by where the money is, obviously. So that's fiat incentives are going to attract the most talented individuals to go wherever they will find the money. So that's been the tough thing, because nuclear power it's not flashy and amazing. Like when it's operating, it's actually really kind of boring. Nuclear power, like the only reason that people ever hear about nuclear power is when something goes wrong, but it keeps the lights on in a lot of places in the eastern United States and Ontario and parts of Europe. And in recent years, it's become very apparent that it is a very important technology to take serious and take good care of and custody and stewardship of when you have existing operating reactors, as seen by Germany shutting down their robust, very state-of-the-art nuclear fleet. It's very, very sad to see, because many of those reactors have been decommissioned to a point where even if they wanted to, they couldn't bring them back, or possibly like 5+ years. So that's very sad to see. And then it didn't manifest into what this utopian vision of what's powered all with windmills and solar panels. Now Germany is aggressively pursuing a lot more coal plants, which is the opposite of what the stated intent for pursuing the line that they were working on.
Not crazy.
Colorado doesn't make any sense, and sometimes and to top it off, what happened in Germany, what a lot of people don't follow this space as immersed as I can get. The Green Party, it recently came out that they had presented fraudulent information when the commission to decide on whether to retire or extend the life of Germany's nuclear power plants was ongoing almost a decade, or like 5 or 6 years ago. So when they were making that decision, there was expert testimony was collected, and then the Green Party actually fraudulently manipulated what the expert testimony said in order to support the narrative that they were presenting. And nobody verified this. Nobody checked their work. Nobody confirmed any of it. They just took their word for it. And then years later, now it's too late to even go back and revisit it, and it doesn't even matter. But that it is what it is. But it's, as far as I'm concerned, like when these decisions are being made, they've shown that they have to be scrutinized very heavily when their position, when their opinion can significantly sway a decision like shutting down an entire nation's nuclear power capacity.
You had mentioned earlier the small modular units I think it's GE that's making these, if I'm correct.
There's dozens.
Oh, there's dozens of them. Okay. I'm curious, is that something that you're most excited about kind of moving forward on the innovation front, or is there something else that you got your eye on that is really exciting in this space?
I want to see as much as possible get to the stage where they can compete commercially. Like, I want to see more large reactors. I want to see more repeats of what was built at Vogel. I want to see more repeats of what was just built in Finland. I want to see Great Britain finish the ones they're working on and continue. I want to see France build more big nuclear. I want to see big nuclear across the board. UAE wants to build another 4. Where I live in Ontario, we've got our large site, the burst reactor already has 800 megawatt reactors, and they want to add another 4 to add an extra 5 gigawatts of capacity on their site. So there's lots of enthusiasm for big nuclear again, which is very reassuring. But there's also, the small reactors are very interesting to me, most particularly because where I work, we're championing a micro reactor, but then also simultaneously in Ontario, the Ontario Power Generation, our main power utility provider, is piloting the GE Hitachi's 300 megawatt boil water reactor at the Darlington site. So that's going to be a first of a kind project. And that reactor is getting a lot of attention. First of all, because it's going to be a lot easier to get over the regulatory processes and licensing, because it's based off of the familiar boil water reactors that are already in wide use. It's just a smaller version of their large gigawatt sized reactor. So that will make it a lot easier, and the market's already familiar with that. So there's already a fairly large order book for this technology. I know at least half dozen European countries are looking at getting at least 4 or 5 or 8 of them. Out west, Alberta and Saskatchewan in Canada are looking at deploying a bunch of these. Saskatchewan to replace a lot of their coal capacity. Alberta wants to deploy them out into the oil sands to use them for oil refining and a lot of displacing their oil use in those areas. And then just there's that one, and then there's another one in New Brunswick that they want to build. Companies called Moltex, and they're going to be using a molten salt reactor type of coolant, which will be able to recycle the spent fuel from other conventional reactors. So we'll be able to get more useful value out of those fuel rods that still have lots of usable power in them, because the fuel rods that go through the conventional reactor only use like 5 to 8% of the available power that is in the uranium. And there's ways to further extract more in different types of reactors. And then there's the one Westinghouse has like a small one that's going to be like 1 megawatt. It'll be able to ship rapidly on the back of the truck to like very remote locations or for quick like emergency uses. There's
It just
there's
seems like
mid-sized ones. Like
everything's just become more modular, and a lot of this is all within like the last 5-10 years that a lot of this is really starting to pick up pace.
Yeah, it's definitely gained a lot of momentum. Canada's SMR action plan was put into action in 2017, 2018, where they started aggressively pursuing 3 different tracks for the larger SMRs, the smaller SMRs, and then others that use coolant and fuel types that'll allow them to achieve much higher temperatures than just a standard boiled water reactor, because that's limited to just what you can boil water at. Whereas with molten salt or high temperature gases or lead cooled, like they can start approaching up as high as 700-800 degrees Celsius, which gives them a lot more industries that they can apply to. So there's still a significant range getting up to like 12, 13, 1400 degrees Celsius that they're still a long ways away from, but it can displace hydrocarbons from a lot of these industries. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not going to displace them entirely. It's just out of power and heat generation. So we're going to have more hydrocarbons available for transportation fuels, for heavy machinery fuels, for building more like complex hydrocarbons and using them as feedstock for doing all kinds of other products that have hydrocarbons at the base of them. And then because they're not being used as much in power generation, they'll be more widely available and cheaper on those markets. And as whether it's the Jevons paradox, just as they become more widely available and cheaper, we're not going to use less of them. We're going to end up using more of them, and we're going to end up using them more efficient because that's what we always end up doing.
So, Ryan, this has been just very enlightening for me. I am, like I said at the beginning of the show, not really well versed on nuclear. I find it fascinating, but not really well versed on it. I really appreciate your time coming on. I know you're active on Twitter, X, whatever we want to call it these days. Your handle is Nuclear Bitcoiner. We'll have that in the show notes. Is there anything else that you want to have in the show notes, or we'll put the books that you mentioned in there? Anything else that you wanted to highlight to put in there, though?
Well, I don't know if there's a few good podcasts. If anybody wants to go down the nuclear rabbit hole, Dr. Chris Kiefer hosts one called the Decoupled Podcast. He always has on great industry experts for great conversations. Had a great 4-part series that explained the entire process of Vogel from start to finish and all of the trials and tribulations that they went through to get that over the line, the struggles that they went through. Another one that I like is Titans of Nuclear, and then Nuclear Barbarians. Those are great for pure nuclear content. And another one that I like to suggest people check out, if you want to see the current state of small modular reactors, there is the I think it's the Nuclear Energy Association, the NEA, put out, it's called the SMR dashboard, and it just covers the current technological readiness of 42 of these SMRs on various different criteria. So it's coming along slowly and gradually, and then before we know it, within the next 5 or 6 years, these one after another is going to start reaching maturity, and we're going to reach a state where nuclear power is finally kind of resurged to the point where it was kind of expected that we were going to get to many, many decades ago, but it's just the market does what the market does, and yeah, it's been a tough slog to get here, but it seems like the demand for power is finally substantial enough that humanity is calling for nuclear to fill that role.
Yeah. It's very exciting. It's so neat to see all these things kind of converging. The AI, Bitcoin sound money, on the energy front, nuclear, and you can see, I don't know, at least I feel like I can kind of see like this is all converging in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Like this is going to get wild where this is all going.
Yeah, well, just like Satoshi combined a bunch of other technologies that already existed into something new, like we're kind of doing that. We take Bitcoin mining, small modular reactors, and a few other technologies, and then we can amplify what any one of them would be capable of on their own. Like the synergy between them will produce something far greater than what we could have conceived if we were just pursuing our own individual paths with these technologies. They're going to have a great companionship. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah.
And, I found myself in this role.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much for making time and coming on the show. This was a blast, very informative, and great having you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was a great conversation.
They want people to vote for them, then we tell them that Bitcoin's good for them. Bitcoin's good for their people. Bitcoin's good for society. Bitcoin fixes a lot of issues. It doesn't just fix money, but it fixes energy. It fixes politics. It fixes so many parts of our lives. We need to sell this to them.